Nobody knows your name in my life. Not my closest friends. Not the people who follow my every move. Not the ones who sit across from me in boardrooms and assume they know what drives me. I built walls so high, so carefully, that I forgot I built them around you too. I am not a man who loses sleep. I am not a man who lingers. I made a decision years ago. Feel less, move faster, build bigger. And it worked. It worked spectacularly. But tonight I sat in an empty room with every light off, and your face appeared the way it always does. Uninvited, unannounced, and absolutely precise. Every detail. The way you tilted your head when you were about to say something that would undo me. The way you made silence feel like something worth keeping. I've never said your name out loud to anyone. That's not indifference. That's the opposite. Some things you protect by never naming them. Some truths are so close to the center of you that speaking them feels like cutting into something vital. Here's the uncomfortable part. I've been protecting this secret so long, I don't know anymore if I'm keeping you safe, or just keeping myself from having to explain something I never fully understood. Tonight feels different, and I don't know yet what I'm going to do with that. There are men who are loud about everything they love. They post it, they announce it, they frame it in gold and hang it where the light catches it just right. I understand the impulse. I've watched it. I've even envied it, in quiet moments I would never admit to anyone. But I was not built that way. I learned early, and I don't mean from books, I mean from the kind of lesson that leaves a mark you carry in your body, that the things you name out loud become vulnerable. Once something has a public shape, the world feels entitled to weigh in, to pick at it, to decide what it means. I wasn't willing to let the world do that to you. So I did what I do with everything that matters. I built around it. Carefully. Methodically. I constructed a version of my life where your name existed only in silence, and I became so precise about it that most days the silence felt natural. You have to understand what kind of machine I became during those years. I was solving problems at a scale most people can't hold in their minds. I was moving capital, moving people, moving entire directions. I was the kind of man who walked into rooms and immediately understood the hidden architecture of power. I could read a situation faster than most people could form an opinion about it. None of that prepared me for you. Because you didn't fit any framework I had. You weren't a problem. You weren't an equation. You were something that operated entirely outside the logic I'd spent years perfecting. And I think that's what I couldn't explain to anyone. How do you describe someone who doesn't fit inside the language you've built for your life? I have sat across from brilliant people, people with extraordinary minds and genuine emotional range, and I have talked about everything. Strategy. Risk. Legacy. Loss. I have been vulnerable in the ways that are acceptable. The ways that feel like honesty, but are actually carefully managed disclosure. I never let your name into any of those conversations. That wasn't an accident. It wasn't shame. It was something closer to precision. The way you keep the most critical variable in a complex system protected from interference. You don't expose it. You don't test it unnecessarily. You preserve it exactly as it is. Because it's the thing that everything else orbits. You were that variable. The uncomfortable truth I've never said out loud is this. I knew that if I named you, really named you, in the presence of someone who would ask follow-up questions, I would have to examine things I had been successfully not examining for years. I would have to look directly at what I had chosen, and what I had not chosen, and why. Is there someone in your life whose name you never say? Not because they're gone, not because it's too painful, but because naming them makes something real that you haven't decided how to face yet. I think more people are keeping that kind of silence than will ever admit it. Silence can be a form of loyalty. It can be a form of love so serious it refuses to be made casual by language. But here's what no one tells you about walls. They don't just keep things out. They keep things in. Whatever you've been protecting, whatever you've been keeping safe inside that silence, it grows in the dark. It becomes more exact, not less. More vivid, not dimmer. I thought the silence would make it easier to carry. I was wrong about that. And tonight, for the first time in longer than I can say clearly, I'm standing outside it, looking at what I actually constructed. And I'm not sure anymore whether I built it to protect you, or to protect myself from having to be honest about what I felt. There was a specific moment. I remember it clearly. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't. It was actually quiet. I was alone, and I had just come through something that had cost me more than I was prepared to admit at the time. And I made a decision that I told myself was rational. I decided to be less available to feelings that didn't serve a clear function. I remember the logic of it. It was almost elegant in its simplicity. Emotion is expensive. Attachment creates exposure. Vulnerability is a liability when you're operating at the level I needed to operate at. So I would contain it. Not eliminate. I wasn't delusional about what I was doing, but contain. Direct. Deploy only where it would produce a useful result. I want to tell you, it worked. For years it worked better than I expected. I built things. Real things. The kind of things that exist in the physical world and change how people live. I moved faster than almost anyone around me, and I attributed a significant portion of that speed to the fact that I had trimmed out the drag that emotion creates when you let it operate without discipline. I was productive in a way that felt almost violent in its efficiency, and I told myself, this is who I am. This is what I chose. This is the version of me that is capable of what I'm here to do. The problem, and there's always a problem, in my experience, with decisions that feel too clean, is that I made this decision in the same season that you appeared. Not before. Not after. During. Which means everything I told myself about not feeling was tested immediately. In the most inconvenient possible way. You didn't ask anything of me. That's what I remember most clearly. You weren't trying to penetrate anything. You weren't making a case for yourself. You were just present, in a way that made my carefully constructed system look exactly like what it was. A workaround. Do you know how unsettling it is to be a person who solves things at scale, who builds systems that work across extraordinary complexity, and then encounter something that your most sophisticated architecture simply does not account for? That was you. That was what you did without trying. And I did what I always do when something doesn't fit the framework. I worked harder. I built faster. I filled every available hour with something that required my attention. I created problems to solve because solving problems is a language I'm fluent in, and the thing you were making me feel didn't have a language I could use. I wonder sometimes if you ever noticed. Because what was actually happening was that I was terrified. Not of you. Not of what you were, but of what was true about me when you were nearby. So I moved faster instead. I chose the empire. I chose the next decision and the one after that, because decisions could be made and executed and filed away, and feelings just sat there, patient and exact, waiting for you to be honest about them. It just needs to be there when you stop. And eventually, everyone stops. I'm at the until it didn't part. I have blackout curtains in every place I've ever lived. It's a practical choice. I work odd hours. I sleep when I can. I don't like light interrupting my control over my own time. But tonight I left them all open, and the room was dark anyway because the world outside was dark, and I sat in that darkness without turning anything on. I don't do that. That's not a habit I have. But tonight, something told me not to reach for the switch. So I sat there. And I want to describe exactly what happened, because I think you'll recognize it, and I think recognition matters more than explanation. Your face appeared. Not as a memory I was reaching for, I wasn't. I wasn't thinking about you. Or more precisely, I was doing what I always do, which is keep you in that part of the mind that is always present but never examined. But something about the dark, the silence, the specific quality of this particular night, something dissolved the system. And there you were. Not a vague impression. Not a soft focus recollection. Exact. The particular angle of light that caught your face in a specific moment I haven't thought about consciously in years. The way you paused before saying something that you knew would be important. The way your stillness had weight to it. The kind of weight that told you the person you were looking at was fully, completely present. I haven't felt that weight in a long time. I spend my life surrounded by people who are performing presence. I recognize it immediately. The eye contact that's slightly too precise. The listening that's slightly too demonstrative. People who are in the room but also narrating their experience of being in the room. You weren't like that. You were just there. And sitting in that dark room, I realized something that I should have examined a long time ago. The reason I've never really stopped thinking about you, even in all the years I wasn't consciously thinking about you, is that you represented something I have never reliably found since. Someone who is actually there. Not performing it, not optimizing for it. Just present, in the full weight of the word. I don't know how to explain what it feels like to be a person who has achieved extraordinary things and still sits alone in the dark, realizing that the most fundamental thing, the most essential, basic human thing, is something you've been working around for years. Memory is cruel in its accuracy. When was the last time someone made you feel like time had weight, instead of just velocity? Because I think that's what we're all actually searching for, underneath every other thing we claim to be searching for. And I think some of us found it once, or almost found it, and then spent years building very impressive, very functional lives that are missing exactly that one thing. I sat in the dark until I understood that. I want to tell you something that might be uncomfortable to hear, because it was uncomfortable to understand. I protected your name because I loved you. Not in the way that sentence usually sounds, not sentimentally, not dramatically. I mean it technically. I mean it in the way an engineer means something when they say a material is load-bearing. Your name, your existence in my life, was structurally significant. And you do not expose structurally significant things to unnecessary stress. This is a logic I've applied to everything that matters. I don't talk about the things that are most important to me in the casual language of importance. I don't mention my core principles in conversations where they'd be tested unnecessarily. This isn't because I'm secretive by nature. It's because I've learned, the hard way, more than once, that naming something in the presence of the wrong audience changes what it is. A thing that exists in private has a shape. It has integrity. It has all its original dimensions intact. The moment you introduce it to the world's tendency to have opinions, something changes. Their understanding of it, their framing of it, their reaction to it, those things land on the original thing and leave traces. I wasn't willing to let the world leave traces on you. But there is a version of protection that is really just avoidance wearing more honorable clothes. There is a version of keeping something sacred that is actually keeping yourself from having to make a decision about it. I don't know, and this is the honest part, the part I'm still working through, I don't know which version of protection I was practicing. I don't know if I was keeping you safe from the world's reduction, or if I was keeping myself safe from the moment where I would have had to say out loud, here is what this is. Here is what I want. Here is what I've been afraid of. Have you ever protected something so carefully that you ended up protecting it from yourself? Have you ever kept something so private that the privacy became its own kind of prison? Because I think that's a more common human experience than we're willing to admit. We call it discretion. We call it dignity. Sometimes we even call it respect for the other person. But sometimes it's just fear with excellent architecture. I built excellent architecture. And tonight I'm asking myself, for the first time with complete honesty, what was I actually afraid of? I don't say that lightly. I have been through enough cycles in my own psychology to know the difference between a moment that feels significant and a moment that actually is. I've sat in the aftermath of decisions that felt seismic and realized later they barely moved anything. So when I say tonight feels different, I want you to know that I'm not saying it because I'm in an emotional state. I'm saying it because the evidence has shifted. Something changed tonight. In that dark room, sitting with your face and your name and all the careful silence I've been keeping. I understood something that had been just slightly outside my reach for a very long time. I understood that the thing I've been protecting was never really at risk from being named. It was at risk from something else, entirely. I've been doing something that I think is very human and very underexamined. I've been keeping the feeling in a preserved state, because preserving it felt like honoring it. But preservation and love are not the same thing. Preservation is a choice made by someone who is afraid of what happens if things change. Love, real love, the kind that operates with integrity and intention, that's a choice made by someone who is willing to engage with change. Who is willing to say, I don't know how this ends. I can't predict the outcome with the precision I usually require. But I'm going to say your name out loud anyway. You can't engineer your way through this kind of truth. I've tried. I have tried with every tool I have, and I am very well equipped. And every time I applied those tools to this particular space, something slipped away from me. The protection has a cost. I don't mean that as judgment. I mean it as something I had to learn the expensive way. The cost isn't obvious. It doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly, in the background, while you're busy running the empire you built in the meantime. And then one night, without warning, you're sitting in a dark room, and it's all there. Every word you didn't say. Every moment you protected instead of inhabited. Every choice you made for preservation instead of presence. Tonight I am clear. I was afraid. Not of you, not of what you'd say or how you'd respond or whether the feeling would be returned. I was afraid of what it meant about me, about who I am, what I actually want, what I've been building toward and what I've been building away from, if I said your name out loud. And I think that might be the most honest thing I've said tonight. I know what I'm going to do with that now. But I'm not going to tell you yet. Because some things need to exist in the space between the decision and the first word. And I'm still in that space. Are you?